Welcome on into Forward Progress presented by Fanduel Sportsbook. I'm your host, Eric Pauly, with our usual panelists. We have Suma, Judah, and TA of CleveAnalytics.com to discuss some Week 13 takeaways, some future bets, some Week 14 openers, and then end with Monday Night Football. We have the Cleveland Browns in Denver. Going to get through all those things. But before we get started, I want to shout out to everybody in the comments on YouTube already. We really appreciate that. And everybody who is watching on X, we appreciate you guys as well. But if you want to get involved with some of your comments and have us discuss some of your thoughts, questions, comments, head over to YouTube, subscribe to the channel, get on into the chat. We love taking your guys' questions live on the show. And make sure you hit that like button. Best way to help us out. But gentlemen, let's get started. Let's discuss some important takeaways from Week 13. Obviously, we are headed into the home stretch of the NFL season. So we have a number of things that we'd like to discuss, and then we'll talk about some more forward-looking things for the upcoming week in the National Football League. Let's start with the Philadelphia Eagles. They go into M&T Bank Stadium and get a massive win as underdogs against the Baltimore Ravens. Yes, we have the whole Justin Tucker scenario, which I'm sure we could touch upon a little bit while we discuss what happened in this game. Tucker left obviously a lot of points out there, has been doing it all year long, and has potentially killed the Baltimore Ravens in the AFC North playoff, in the AFC North title picture. But let's talk about the Eagles. We want to specify in on them. I'll start with UTA because I know how you were on Philadelphia coming into the year. It's so far more than justified your love for the Philadelphia Eagles. At this point, are the Eagles the best team in the NFL?
I'll probably still give the slight edge to Detroit from a ratings perspective, but I do think that they're the second best team and clearly have a real shot to win the NFC. So just the way their defense is playing, I thought yesterday might be a tough matchup for them. Really a step it up in class, if you will, and they shut the Ravens down and shut Derrick Henry down. We saw their corners really step up. Cooper DeJean with that tackle on Derrick Henry, he's showing his toughness. So I think from a ratings perspective, they're clearly top 2 in the NFC and like I said, top probably 3 overall with Buffalo in there among the league's leaders. So for me, it's just more validating what I saw going into the year, and it's kind of all coming through. And they've got a really easy schedule the rest of the way, so they've got a nice path, especially if Detroit loses this week. Tough game versus Green Bay. And they've got some tough games coming up. Even, obviously San Francisco is a little bit, it's a little bit different scenario, but it's never going to be an easy game. And then they've got the Vikings. And so I do think that, they've got a shot to get the number 1 seed in the NFC, which obviously it's a massive difference for them. I think, with a shot to beat Detroit when they're at home, outdoors, potentially in cold weather versus going to the Dome. So clearly the next couple of weeks are huge. I think this Thursday night's a big one for them.
Certainly a big one for the Eagles, just from a watching perspective, obviously, as the Green Bay Packers face off the Lions. We will discuss that game a little bit down the line as massive football game and obviously deserves our attention. So we'll get to some thoughts on that in a little bit. But Suma, I'll pass over to you. Do you have the Eagles rated over the Lions at this point, or do you still think the Lions are the best team in the NFL?
I still have them, I think, slightly behind the Lions. But I will say, and we will talk about it later today, the Lions are losing bodies left and right on defense. And the Eagles are quietly looking a little bit more like a complete football team. I will say that they won yesterday while Hurts had, I think, 114 net yards passing. Correct me if I'm wrong, something like that. So they were once again at some point in a game script where they were able to control the game. Defense played very well. They did not shut the Ravens down by any stretch. And I think we have a completely different game in the fourth quarter if Justin Tucker doesn't miss 7 points total. But they have a very good, well-coached defense. They have a good offensive line, decent quarterback play, decent run game. I mean, Baltimore was able to take away their run game for like 3 quarters. But at some point, they were still in their favorite game script where Jalen Hurts did not have to pass the ball in obvious passing situations. And I still want to see them having such a game, to be honest with you, because right now I will trust the Lions offense more than the Eagles offense overall. But considering that the Lions are getting completely decimated by injuries on defense, I have a few doubts about their stability come January.
Yeah, definitely understood. We've talked a lot about how the Lions defense was punching above their weight class, and then now we add on some injuries to some key players there as well. So definitely something to note. It's something we will discuss in more detail when we break down Thursday night, just a little bit later on. And Jalen Hurts, like you said there, Suma, 11 of 19, 118 passing yards, 1 touchdown. Did add 29 yards and a touchdown on the ground, but a lot of the handicap I want to say from a lot of people was that whether or not the Eagles can get the run game going against this number 1 Ravens rush defense. And Barkley had 23 for 107 and a touchdown as they continue to hammer that run game. And we'll see if the passing game will be able to keep up as the season progresses. But Judah, finishes off. Your thoughts. Are the Eagles the best team in the NFL?
No, I don't think so. I kind of agree with Suma's point. Is that like you're not going to win many games when your quarterback's passing for 120 yards, and I think it's especially true as you get later in the season, and your strength of opponent increases in playoff time. I think they really have kind of one path to winning, and you certainly have to, I guess, say that this defense is legit. They did not like shut down the Ravens by any means. They were outgained by 120 yards. They gave up almost 400 yards of total offense. As Suma said, this looks very, very different if Justin Tucker hits a couple of field goals, but this is still a great defense. They're probably the best in the NFL right now. The offense, I think, is just limited. And when you think about teams like the Bills, who, when everything kind of breaks down, you can have Josh Allen to rely on. It just gives you such a leg up, and they also have a good defense. I just think that the Eagles are fragile in how they effectively need to play games, and I think it's very game state dependent. That is not to say that the Eagles are not a great team. They are. I just think they have some fragile components that might not express itself in a kind of 4 to 5 game sequence when they're in positive game scripts. And when you find yourself in negative game scripts a little more often in playoff time, I think it might reveal a different story about the Eagles.
Certainly, and great points. That was the biggest test for the Eagles, at least in the second half of the schedule. They do have, like TA mentioned, a very easy schedule coming up. Yes, they did pass this test against Baltimore, but obviously it's going to be much different facing whoever they do take on in the playoffs rather than Carolina, Pittsburgh, Washington, Dallas, and the end of the season with the Giants. So we'll learn more about this Philadelphia Eagles team during the course of the season. But let's talk about the Atlanta Falcons and their signal caller, Kirk Cousins. 3 weeks of just absolutely terrible play from Kirk Cousins, capped off this week. I know you wrote about this a lot, TA, about how the situation was very unique for the Chargers coming off of Monday Night Football, playing a team off a bye, now from a West Coast team to a 1 p.m. Eastern time team. Ended up not mattering as the Chargers were able to win this game, but probably more to do with Kirk Cousins and his inability to do anything. So I'm actually going to start and go back to you there, Judah. Is Kirk Cousins cooked, and when are we going to start seeing Michael Penix, or were there some things you saw schematically where you anticipate Cousins to maybe pick things back up moving shortly?
Yeah, I mean, Cousins was not great, and I don't think it takes kind of any advanced stat to see that. Having just watched the game yesterday, he's like lobbing passes, making some real mental errors. The 3rd and goal interception that he threw, he just lobbed it to a defender, have absolutely no idea what happened. Very late on the 4th and 5, pick 6. It does not require, I think, kind of much analysis there to see that he's kind of lost a little bit of the arm strength. The data does happen to back that up. There's an interesting NGS stat about his ball velocity and it being the worst of any game so far this season, or like his max velocity was the worst of any quarterback in the game. So something's clearly up there. I mean, it was a pretty interesting, like the Chargers offense did nothing yesterday. It's like 6th percentile in success rate, 8th in EPA, and won that game. But Cousins was dreadful. I think if we start to see a couple more games of this, then there's going to be some quarterback switch, or at least talks of that. The Falcons are still right now tied for 1st in the division. I don't think they're going to look to make any drastic change, but kind of should that possibility or should that situation change, I think we might see a quarterback switch. But not great for Cousins. Things can change. It is definitely interesting to note that the 2 quarterbacks coming off Achilles tears are having some of the worst kind of last months of the season. Rodgers and Cousins are I think like the worst and third worst in EPA. But yeah, definitely I think time to worry about the Falcons. I'm not necessarily panicking and saying like let's give it all up for Penix, but can't be optimistic about what he's shown over the last bunch of weeks.
Yeah, totally understand. Like you said, you don't need to be somebody like you guys who are diving into the advanced analytics. You could just be a ball watcher to see that Kirk Cousins is clearly not who he was pre-injury, and in Minnesota, as the season has gone on, the wear and tear definitely looking like it's affecting that Achilles. We'll toss to you quickly, TA, on Kirk Cousins. Is he simply cooked, and do you anticipate Atlanta needing to make a change to try to make the postseason, or considering the fact that they are 6-6, tied for first place, they probably will ride the Kirk Cousins train until the wheels fall off for at least the rest of this season, TA?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. Judah made some good points. I didn't see the next gen stuff, so that's really interesting. And obviously, the Falcons have all that data, and they see him every day, so they know whether the Achilles is causing him to to hurt his velocity and pushing off that leg and all those sorts of things. So if that's the case, then you absolutely have to make the switch. I'll just say, I was on Atlanta yesterday, and I feel like, part of the handicap was just, the spot itself, the situational spot, which is kind of old school handicapping, was like it was one of the most egregious kind of gaps from a rest and kind of, getting a team off a bye versus a team off short rest, flying across country at 1:00. And it was a brutal game against the Ravens, all those sorts of things. So, the Chargers offense was atrocious. They had the second lowest success rate of any team yesterday on offense, the worst EPA, and they still won. They got outgained by 12% on a success rate basis. They didn't do anything. The only touchdown they had was on the pick six, but Cousins just continually made those mistakes. And it wasn't, some of it was he just missed guys and just didn't have enough mustard on the ball. And then other times he just made dumb mistakes, like that fourth down on a long out pattern that just had no shot at all. It just didn't make any sense. So I don't know if he's overcompensating, if there's any physical issues, but that was a horrible performance. And the revenge game narrative coming up this week against Minnesota. But of all the defenses you're going to face when you've got confidence issues and potential physical issues, Brian Flores' heavy blitz scheme defense is probably not the one you want to face. And so that could be a really interesting reunion. And if there is, like I said, if there is anything physically wrong with him, it could just be wear and tear after the Achilles, after 10, 11 weeks. Maybe he took a hit. I don't know, but definitely do consider a change possible, just if that's the case. But, this is going to be a big test for him coming up.
Yes, certainly. It's hard to measure. Obviously, like Judah mentioned, with those next-gen stats showing that there clearly is an issue with Kirk Cousins. However, whether it be because he's just, aging, it's because the Achilles, he took a hit and now he's not just 100% right. We don't know those type of things, so we're not going to really speculate. But the proof is in the pudding. As it currently stands, Kirk Cousins has been playing awfully. And if Atlanta wants to win the NFC South and play in the postseason, he's got to get it together. Or maybe they do make a drastic change. We shall see. Let's talk about the NFC West. We've discussed this division for obvious reasons multiple times in the past couple of weeks. And now we have the Seattle Seahawks 7-5 leading the division, Arizona 6-6 behind them, LA 6-6 behind them, and then San Francisco now 5-7 in last place in the NFC West. We've already discussed the show in past weeks about how we're basically out on the 49ers. Saw a combination of obviously the Super Bowl runner-up hangover, plus all the injuries, plus all the Brandon Staley anti-voodoo, because he's now on the defensive staff. We know what he's done with the Chargers and losing these close games. Whatever it may be, though, the most likely candidates to win the West are the three teams that are not the 49ers. So I'll throw it right back to you, TA. Who do you have winning the NFC West at this point?
I guess I'm going to take the easy way out and take the Seahawks, just because they've got the lead, and obviously they go head-to-head this week against Arizona. But I do think it's a true toss-up between those two teams, and this week's huge. Obviously, Seattle has the tiebreaker, and if Arizona wins, I think they get it right back, because I think they have a better record in the division and in the conference, I believe, if they win this game. But I have to double-check all that. And then the Rams are still lurking there, one game behind. They just have a brutal schedule. They got Buffalo coming up. Maybe Buffalo lets down a little bit. after clinching the AFC East, and they get a break. But they got to win that game to even have a chance here. And so I would lean Seattle. I just think Seattle is the better overall team slightly than Arizona. And, Arizona is playing well enough to, they're playing well enough to win these games. They're just not executing at the end. And so, and something's, Kyler Murray has not played well the last couple of weeks. So like I said, slight lean to Seattle, but I don't have a strong conviction there. I still think the Seattle offensive line is a major issue, and we'll see if they can block Arizona this week. But I mean, it's pretty fascinating between these three teams, what happens. And, one thing I want to mention was with San Francisco, we're counting them out. They're actually, I mean, to be fair, they're still only 2 games out, and they get to play. They play all the teams left in the division at least once. Well, only once. And they got Chicago this week. I know that the line is interesting. It's only 3.5. And obviously McCaffrey's out, and they've got some injuries to deal with. At first blush, I was thinking maybe they'll just get to sit everybody, but they're still mathematically alive, and it's not impossible for them to get there. It's probably less than 10%, but enough for an NFL team to keep playing through it. So I'm curious to see how they treat the next couple of weeks, but I thought that was interesting. But like I said, lean Seattle, but I don't feel great about any of these teams.
Yeah, certainly understood. And like you mentioned there, TA, the Seahawks getting 2.5 in Arizona, rematch of just 2 weeks ago where Seattle won as a PK at home against the Arizona Cardinals. And then the 49ers, they're going to probably be without Christian McCaffrey for the rest of the season, which finally saw him look a little spry last night pre that injury. Obviously, that's going to be massive. But the 49ers, too early to count them out, though. It's going to take a lot for them to maybe make it as the NFC West winner. But Suma, what are your thoughts on the NFC West? Do you have a different take than TA? Do you think that maybe Arizona's a better team than Seattle, or are you sticking with the team that's currently in the lead and controls more of their destiny in Seattle?
Not really. I think whoever wins this week's game has the best chances. The Cardinals, if they beat Seattle, they will play the Patriots and the Panthers. And then I think also the Rams and then the Niners in week 18. And we don't know where the Niners will be at this point. At that point. So I think if the Cardinals beat the Seahawks this week, they are probably the front runner. I like their offense a little bit more. I agree with TA that Seattle is more like a complete team, but I still prefer the Cardinals offense, and I think this is the most upside unit in this division, so to speak. And yeah, beat Seattle at home this week, and then you have a very good path to that division win.
Yeah, it should be a great game, and we'll talk about that game a little bit more in detail as obviously it's massive and it's happening in week 14. It has so many implications, so we will talk about that game in more detail shortly. But first, let's talk about the Kansas City Chiefs and what to make of them. Obviously, they win, and they win ugly. We saw what happened on Black Friday, where it took a missed snap to somehow salvage a victory for Kansas City. I'll go right back to you, Suma. What do we make about this Chiefs team and how they win and how they are so unimpressive, but they still end most games with a W in the win column?
Man, what can I say? The defense has their mental breakdowns. Everyone is pointing to that Jalen Watson injury because since then, their pass defense, I mean, they are not that bad. They're still very decent against the run overall, but they have their mental breakdowns and broken coverages against the pass. So that's something we did not see earlier in the season. And on offense, I mean, left tackle is a major issue. I wonder if DJ Humphries will be the hopeful upgrade. I think there's a scenario like 4 weeks from now. They have DJ Humphries at left tackle. Hollywood Brown will be back. And then you have a receiving group that's pretty solid and should be enough for another magical Chiefs run into the playoffs. I mean, against the Raiders, their offense, it was basically decent chunk play through the air, or Mahomes took a sack. So really weird game. I mean, last couple of seasons, they probably don't hang around so much against a team like the Raiders and AOC. But I still have such a strong prior on the team that I don't think they will be in deep trouble. Like I said, 4 weeks from now, we could be looking at a different left tackle, at a decent wide receiver 2/3 in Hollywood Brown, and no one will talk about all these close games.
Yeah, certainly. And funny comment from Patrick in the YouTube comments. Tomlin invited Andy Reid to offseason voodoo camp. It's like how the tight ends do tight end university. Mike Tomlin at Voodoo University, and Andy Reid was clearly in attendance this past summer based on how everything was going down. But we'll pass to you, Judah. Talk to us about the Kansas City Chiefs and what to make of this team and how they're able to pull out these ugly wins despite being so close to defeat so many times this season. But here they are, leading the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think they tend to find themselves in these games, and it's not a coincidence that they kind of are winning them more often than the average team. That's, I think, a function of having Patrick Mahomes. But yeah, like Suma mentioned, this is something wrote about 3 weeks ago, talked about it 3 weeks ago. The Chiefs have been an entirely different defense since Jalen Watson went down. They're like bottom 10 in basically any coverage metric. The run defense has still been great, but that's almost a problem because it forces teams to throw on them so often because they know they're not going to be able to run the ball. And when your defense is struggling as much as theirs, it can lead to some problems. And I mean, they were getting gashed by Aiden O'Connell, who threw for 9 yards per attempt. I think that's his career high. It's been happening consistently against some pretty bad offenses. The other kind of part, and I agree with Suma, we should have a really strong prior on the Chiefs offense. And I think come playoff time, it's going to look very, very different. I think it will certainly be massive if they can hold on to that number 1 seed, not only for the field, the home field advantage and the bye, but also just like another week to get their guys healthy. But I do think it's going to be a difficult stretch for them. They've also run into just some absurd injury luck. And I think it's going to continue this week. I mean, Ladd McConkey left the game for the Chargers. If he's unavailable, they've had constant situations of like great spots where other teams have been dealing with some mass injuries. I think the Chiefs are going to be fine. I guess one concern is like Patrick Mahomes' sack avoidance, which is what made him, I mean, among many other things, made him so incredible. He had a streak of like 180 scrambles without taking a sack, when the base rate of sacks is like 10%. Which is just an outrageous number. But his pressure to sack rate this year is like pedestrian. It's 18%. It's smack in the middle of the pack. He's taken a whole bunch of sacks each of the last bunch of weeks. That's an area of concern. Do I think it's possible that it's just like Mahomes is kind of getting a feel for his offensive line and is going to be playing in a different style, be willing to run more often in the playoffs? Sure. Is it also a worrying sign? Absolutely. All that is to say, the Chiefs are not as good as their record, I don't think, but it's going to be a very different conversation in regular season versus playoff time as things kind of change for the Chiefs and how they play down the stretch.
Yeah, we talked about it last weekend, 2 weeks ago, about the Chiefs. When you have the great equalizer in Patrick Mahomes, it is not going to be a shock that in these one-score close games, coin flip-esque games, the guy with the team with the best quarterback currently going is going to be the one more often on the winning side of those situations. And as we saw last year with the Chiefs, obviously coming into the playoffs, not having a bye, going on the road, winning 3 straight, and then, of course, winning the Super Bowl by changing the way that they play, I think it would be foolish to be – I understand why there'd be some concern, but I think it'd be foolish to be writing off the Chiefs. And, yeah, they're not as good as the record, but you still have Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and championship DNA. As much as that's probably difficult to quantify in some situations, obviously it's apparent and it is real. So I wouldn't be betting against the Chiefs at any point if in the playoffs. But I guess we shall see what ends up happening. Let's talk about a young quarterback who's finally showing some strides, Bryce Young. Gets benched earlier this year, comes back, and is finally playing like an average quarterback. Why is that such a big deal? Because he was playing prior to it like one of the worst quarterbacks I've ever seen. And average is a gigantic leap for Young, and obviously now he's looking good. The Panthers almost got a massive win at home yesterday, and Bryce Young is finally showing some flashes of being decent, which again is a far cry from how bad he was last year and the start this year. I'll go back to you, Judah, to start. Bryce Young, what have you seen what have you noticed that has been shown in his improvement? And at this point, is Bryce Young good?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, the turnaround. Again, I don't think it's. I mean, the data does back this up, but just watching him and like people throw around these terms about like confidence, and as a data person, you kind of look and say like, okay, that's just kind of nonsense that or a thing that announcers say when they don't have filler, but like it does seem to be true that there is some difference in play, and I'm even looking at his play in tight pockets in particular. And this is a guy who, over the last 3-4 weeks, has had like a tight pocket as charted by PFF on like 30% of throws. He's never even gotten close to that number before. He is allowing, and his play from within the pocket has been so much better, which is one area. And then the second is his sack avoidance and his pressure to sack rate, which is routinely at like 30% a game. Has been sub 10% in every single game, which I think is a function of the same idea of just being a lot more confident in the pocket in his progressions. There are, and I think exactly the almost game-winning touchdown. It's a perfect example of just a player not panicking, as I think he probably would have earlier, stepping up, making a play. He does seem like a great quarterback. We don't need to rattle off kind of stats about which show why he's been better. It is apparently true to everyone. It's apparently true by the results of the game. It is certainly one of the coolest stories, I think, of the season, and is really a great thing to see. I hope it continues.
Certainly hope it continues. Tia, I saw you tweeting a little bit about some Bryce Young statistics and whatnot. Talk to me about what you're seeing from Bryce Young, Tia.
I mean, I think Judah hit on all that. I mean, if you just watch him play, it's night and day difference. He's not panicking. I think the good news is his offensive line is playing well for him, so that's good. But he's just making quicker reads, and he's more accurate, and so all those things I think are have been positive. I mean, and the fact that, and I don't know how much of it is Dave Canales or just after a while just getting used to the speed of the NFL and all those sorts of things. But I mean, he's fifth in the NFL in PFF grade. I think since week 9, he's league average when it comes to EPA. I think he's just playing much more confident and much better. And I tweeted about how somebody actually reminded me. I can't believe they remember this, but I wrote in my preview last year before his rookie year just about how I thought we needed to slow the roll on a guy like Young because he's obviously a shorter quarterback. People wanted to compare him to Drew Brees coming out. It's like it took Drew Brees a couple of years and a couple of bad years before he figured things out, kind of how to work the pocket, how to find those lanes. You forget if you look at the first 2 years of Drew Brees' career. I mean, he was 10-17 as a starter. His success rate was below 40%. I don't have his EPA numbers. I don't have EPA that far back, but he was one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. He had more interceptions than touchdowns, and it wasn't until he turned things around his third year that he became a really good quarterback, obviously. And then when he went to New Orleans, he was a Hall of Fame quarterback. So I'm not saying that's the same trajectory, but I think we could be seeing a little bit of that here, just in terms of figuring out the pocket. It's not like a Kyler Murray or Russell Wilson even, who are just so mobile and so good outside the pocket that they made plays that way out of structure. The Bryce Young's not that guy. I mean, he can move around a little bit, but he's not nearly to that level. So he's got to be able to work from the pocket, and it just takes time to figure all that stuff out. So I don't think he's ever going to be an elite quarterback per se, but I do think that at least if he's competent like he is now, I mean, it's showing Carolina. I know the front office people in Carolina are probably really happy. They just wanted to see something, especially in a bad quarterback class like we've got coming up. I think this is definitely enough to keep going with him. And not to try and get not to acquire another quarterback at this point. Obviously, we'll see what happens at the end of the year, but you got to feel good if you're a Panthers front office exec at this point.
We know Carolina invested on their offensive line last year to try to make things better for Bryce. Didn't work out so great until it started to turn around a little bit. Have dealt with injuries, but we'll see. Maybe Bryce Young gets a couple more weapons potentially this offseason to see if that also unlocks his development in year 2 with Dave Canales. Some continuity there from the offensive play side as well. But final takeaway before we have to talk a little bit more about, obviously, some futures, Week 14 and Monday Night Football. But let's start with the Arizona Cardinals and Jonathan Gannon's decision to go for a field goal, to go up 6 with 3 minutes left. If you were watching that Cardinals-Vikings game, you know what ends up happening. The Vikings come down and win that football game. I'll start with you, Suma. What do you make of that decision by Gannon? And obviously, that was a huge loss for this team that, could be fighting for first place with a win. this upcoming week against Seattle. And you mentioned you do like Arizona overall in the NFC West. So talk to me about the decision and what that means for both Arizona and also Minnesota getting that big win.
Yeah, I mean, that decision is like a classic talking point. It has been for years in the analytics community. What do you do when you are up by 3 and it's like fourth down, and it might be a go for it situation. Do you go for it, or do you kick the field goal to go up 6? And I think the wise decision in this situation would have been to go for it. It was, I think, 4th and goal from the 4-yard line of Minnesota. And if you convert, game is pretty much over in your favor. And if you don't convert, the opposing, or you don't force the opposing team to use all 4 downs because they have to score a touchdown. And yeah, that's how Minnesota attempted that drive. And yeah, they drove all the way down the field and scored a touchdown. Because when you are only up by 3, the opposing team might not use all 4 downs to desperately score a touchdown. At some point, when you stop them on 3rd down, they might settle for a field goal to secure overtime. So yeah, I also saw a clip from Greg Olsen today where he explained that beautifully, and I think that should pretty much be the color commentator standard. I think Greg Olsen is one of the best right now, or maybe the best color commentator, and I'm still mad they took him away from us for Tom Brady. But yeah, Minnesota, they are in a very good situation. But I will say I was a little bit more impressed by the Cardinals. They moved the ball pretty well overall, I would say. Maybe needed to find the end zone a little bit more, but also their defense, I think, made it very tough on Minnesota. Overall, I think that the Cardinals defense has been making a step forward in recent weeks. And I think they are playing above their talent level, which is probably a attribute to very good coaching. But yeah, I was impressed by the Cardinals to go to Minnesota and basically lead all game until that late collapse was pretty promising. And yeah, I would not take too much away from that game. From the Vikings here, yeah, squeaked by, and this is going to be a fun playoff team.
Yep, certainly. Like we said, the Vikings have the Kirk Cousins revenge game, but as it currently stands with Kirk Cousins' level of play, don't know how much revenge he might be getting on this great defense. But I'll pass over to you, TA, for a final breakdown on your thoughts on that move that Gannon made. I know Sumo got into some of the analytics there, so that was very great to understand like some of the key metrics behind the decision-making processes, which is obviously very important. But TA, what's your take on the Gannon decision and what ended up transpiring in Minnesota?
Yeah, I mean, I think Suma hit the nail on the head, kind of the incentives and just the it's not very intuitive necessarily if you don't kind of think about it that way in terms of what the motivations are for a team like Minnesota if you don't get it versus getting kicking a field goal. Just to put some numbers behind it, I saw one win probability model say Arizona lost about 9% of win probability by kicking that field goal. So you could put some numbers behind it. And Minnesota got to a 4th and 5 from the 33, which if you're down 3 there, I'm not 100% certain they would, but I think they would kick with about a little over 2 minutes left. But most certainly, any of those 4th downs, you have to go for it if you're down 6 versus down 3. So, that did cost him. And, obviously I'm a back Gannon for a while and a big supporter, but that was a big mistake there. And he actually, there's another time they went up 12 late in the 3rd quarter and he kicked an extra point instead of going for 2. So you made a couple of mistakes, and normally he's been pretty good on 4th down decisions and things like that. So and going for 2 in the right spot. So 2 mistakes in one game really cost them from a win probability standpoint. It's too bad for them. They really needed that win, and they played well enough to win. I thought they outplayed Minnesota for the most part, at least it looked like it. So a big loss for them, and hopefully they learn from that, and hopefully Lizzie, I know he's got an analytics guy in his ear, so I'd be surprised if they didn't tell him to go for it there. Yeah, that's just a mistake. And I'm glad that Olsen was able to explain it to he does a really good job of explaining things succinctly and just, make it understandable. It wasn't very difficult. If you listen to him, it kind of makes sense quickly. So having the ability to do that, he's clearly the best color guy in the league and way better than Brady.
Way better than Brady, but sometimes the name is what gets you the fame, and that's why Mr. Olsen is demoted, and Tom Brady, who's literally not allowed to critique certain things due to his ownership of the Raiders, is getting some primetime color analysts. But let's move on, gentlemen. We have, of course, futures to talk about, some Week 14 and Monday Night Football. Before we get into that, we have to shout out our sponsor, FanDuel Sportsbook. Bet the NFL season on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Easily the best user interface of any sportsbook out there, as well as lightning fast bet settlements, great array of betting options, and some really great lines. Right now, all customers get a profit boost every single NFL game day. That means you can pump up your gridiron winnings multiple times a week. And tonight, Monday Night Football, Monday night, same game parlay, profit boost token. FanDuel has tons of ways you can get in on the NFL action. You can bet on money lines, spreads, player props, and more. Plus, with super simple live betting, lightning fast bet settlement, and instant withdrawals, FanDuel makes betting on the NFL easier than ever before. Just visit FanDuel.com/forward-progress to download FanDuel today. Must be 21 plus and present in select states, or 18 plus and present in DC. Opt-in required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable profit boost tokens. Restrictions apply, including token expiration. See terms for both offers at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut or visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. All right, guys, let's look at the offensive rookie of the year market. We spent a number of times this past couple of weeks discussing the market. We talked about how Bo Nix was getting some steam, how maybe Brock Bowers deserves some love. Jaden Daniels, of course, was not looking so great. But then what happens this past week? Of course, Nix plays tonight. Bowers is a hell of a game, but Jaden Daniels has an absolutely mammoth game against the Titans, and now is seeing his odds go back to -270. Of course, Nix can gain some ground with a good performance tonight. But I'll start with you here, Judah. What are your thoughts on this market? Is Jaden Daniels now at this point deservedly so a much bigger favorite, or do you expect maybe Bo Nix to do better for his ranking tonight, or Brock Bowers from what he's been doing? Where's the love for Bowers at 12-1?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked to Bowers at like 27-1, and I think the case is still there. I think Jaden Daniels is too short right now. The guy's still having one of the better rookie seasons we've seen in a long time. Washington, I think, quieted a lot of concerns yesterday with a big win. They do not have a particularly difficult schedule. They should make the playoffs relatively easily, and Daniels is probably going to finish with some of the best efficiency numbers. And yes, Bo Nix has been great over the last couple of weeks. If you look at kind of the full season, he's still been a below average quarterback. I don't think they're a slam dunk to finish as strong. They also have a little bit of a tougher schedule. I think Daniels is a little bit too short right now. When you kind of consider all things, take away a bit of the recency bias, because there are going to be more things that are going to happen in the future, and kind of the moment in time we're at now is a little bit arbitrary. And I think when you take a bigger picture look, it's kind of a slam dunk, I think, for Daniels.
Yeah, certainly agree. If you look at Ben Baldwin tweeted a chart versus production-based measure of quarterback play with PFF offensive grade on the bottom, EPA per play on the left axis, and Jaden Daniels in the mix with Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow. Yes, is this a Washington Homer fan just trying to give myself some more love? Absolutely, but he looked great, and obviously they have the bye week this week. We know we've discussed whether or not the injury has been hampering him. Let's see how he does coming off this bye heading into New Orleans. But I'll go to you, TA. Any thoughts on this market? Do you think Jaden's too short, or you see value deep down the board, though probably can't get much deeper than Bowers at 12-1?
It's too short. I actually am mad at myself. I got into who did I was arguing with somebody on Twitter. Somebody posted midweek about how Bo Nix they wanted to bet Bo Nix at like plus 150 or something, and how it's a great time to get in. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, Jaden Daniels is 5th in the league in EPA per dropback. Bo Nix is 22nd. Like, it's as if the first 2 months of the season just don't matter at all. I just don't understand. And, again, Washington has a better shot of making the playoffs than Denver. It's just the gap was way too wide. And then if you just look at Bo Nix, and we could talk about it, when we talk about the game tonight. I mean, he looks really good lately. But, I mean, he's the last 2 opponents, Atlanta and Las Vegas, he faced teams that didn't have 3 of their top 4 cornerbacks in both games. They're completely decimated. Atlanta didn't even have a pass rush. They're kind of running on fumes heading into their bye. Like, he just had great situations that he played in the last 2 weeks. Against the Chiefs, he wasn't great. He was okay. And again, as Drew just talked about, the Chiefs' pass defense is not nearly as good as it once was. And then if you go back prior to that, he was terrible against the Ravens, a bad Ravens secondary on the road. He wasn't great a couple of weeks prior to that either. So, just if you look at the whole body of work, it's not even a contest. So, we'll see. You could almost wait until, to kind of hope Bo Nix has a decent game tonight and they win. And maybe those odds get a little bit tighter because it looks like Jaden Daniels took more money and he's back up to like minus 280 or something. Maybe Knicks, they win tonight and those odds get closer, and then you could take a stab at Jaden Daniels. But I don't think it's really even close, to be honest.
That is music to my ears. And again, obviously I'm a Washington fan, but when you do like watching these games, it's not just even the eye test. Again, when you're in a chart measuring quarterback efficiency and you're with Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, and Josh Allen, obviously that's a really great sign. Suma, your thoughts on this race?
Yeah, I mean, I have seen some talk about Brock Bowers over the weekend. Like I think Jeremy Fowler tweeting about it, someone from ESPN liking Brock Bowers, offensive rookie of the year. And I'm thinking to myself, what would the final stat line of Brock Bowers need to be for him to really be considered ahead of Jane Daniels and Bo Nix? I don't know. I mean, right now he's at 880 yards, 4 touchdowns. I guess. I mean, you will probably need to go into the triple-digit catches. I don't know, 1,300 yards, 4 or 5 more touchdowns to be in consideration, I would guess. So, odds came down on Brock Bowers, but I don't really think he has any single chance.
Well, so Tia, you have another thought?
Yeah, I just want to add quickly. One thing about this: use kind of the near term the recency bias that you get from the media and Twitter and social media and all those sorts of things that you hear, like the Bo Nix and whatnot, where the odds shorten and everyone just recommends taking the odds. Everybody wants to bet on they never want to bet on the favorite, right? They always want to find the long shot or the guy at plus money, even though it's not even realistic that they're going to win. So take advantage of that if you can. If you ever see those, I mean, I remember last year in the MVP market, it's like every other week a new quarterback took the lead, and it was like whoever wins the next week's game all of a sudden became the big favorite. And it's like, try to take advantage of those situations if you can. I mean, you've got to look at the entire season and kind of step back when you make these bets. So don't get caught up in the near-term narrative. Kind of if you step back and really think about it, you could probably find some good wagers on a week-to-week basis because this market fluctuates just so much. So that'd be the only thing I would consider.
A very good point. Recency bias is a hell of a drug, and obviously in the NFL we see these odds change massively. And I agree that Jaden Daniels is probably short, even though you're laying money for him to win an award. What he's been doing has been absolutely amazing, and we'll talk a little bit more about Bo Nix coming up. Before we talk about Monday Night Football, let's get into some Week 14 action. Of course, we want to discuss some interesting opening odds, and we'll start with a massive game on Thursday night: Green Bay, Detroit. We discussed this very briefly, but we want to talk about it more in detail now with the Lions' defensive injuries and how they're absolutely piling up. And right now, Detroit is laying 3.5 at home, total of 51.5. We'll go to you, Suma, because you were flirting with some of these. You wanted to talk about these injuries in more detail. So talk to me about this opening line and what you expect to kind of transpire on Thursday.
Yeah, first of all, let's take a look at the injury list of the Detroit Lions defense. I will start with the defensive line. And this is not just last week, but this is on the season. Marcus Davenport, IR, Aiden Hutchinson, IR, Mekhi Wingo, IR, Josh Pascal left last week, unlikely to play. Levi Ovonzorike left with a hamstring last week, unlikely to play. Linebacker Derek Barnes, Alex Anzalone, Malcolm Rodriguez, all on IR. Secondary, Ennis Rakestraw, hamstring, IR. Emmanuel Mosley was inactive, but should be back this week, or is expected to be back. And I think Carlton Davis, who was inactive last week, is expected to practice this week. I mean, that front seven is absolutely decimated. And just on paper, this might be one of the worst in the game right now. And on offense, Taylor Decker, comments didn't sound too optimistic today. I guess he's going to miss a second game in a row. But back to the defense, when you have such a decimated defensive line and linebacking group, I think one of the worst matchups you could possibly get into is Matt LaFleur and that Packers offense. And I'm personally having a hard time thinking about ways the Lions defense where they can get stops against that offense. And opening line above a field goal. I would not be surprised if we saw some more Packers money once we get more injury clarification, but I think this is already pretty clear that the Lions will have a massive issue on the defensive side.
I'm going to pass to you here, Judah, because we talked about a few weeks ago how the Lions defense was punching above their weight class, and you were a big proponent of mentioning some of their stats. But then they've put together a bunch of good, solid defensive games. But now, obviously, these injuries are piling up, which is going to be very difficult for anybody to overcome. But Judah, I'm curious your thoughts now, because add in injuries, add in your expected regression, I guess you can correct me if I'm wrong there, of this defensive unit in general. So how do those two things come into play against Matt LaFleur and the Green Bay Packers?
I think it's a lot like what the second half of the Bears-Lions game looked like after the Lions lost a bunch of players. And like, you're going to put yourself in good defensive situations when you're beating teams by 21 in the third quarter. But I think it's a different story against a Packers team, and especially if DJ Reader can't go. I mean, like, he missed practice today. It's like the equivalent of I guess a Thursday.
Missed that.
Yeah, like that's a pretty big deal, especially for how well the Packers run the ball, and like, he's a great run stuffing defensive lineman. It just seems like the Lions, you just cannot sustain the level of injury that they have, and it's a defense that, as we said, is bound to regress. I think there's probably some value on the Packers. There's probably some value on the over here as well. I mean, like, people love betting Lions games in Detroit on the over. I would not be shocked to see this total steam a bit, especially as we get more word about the injuries.
Definitely understood. Any thoughts, TA, on side or total as we look toward Thursday Night Football?
No, I mean, I agree with everybody. Second half was a totally different game versus Caleb Williams. I mean, you're losing Malcolm Rodriguez is a big deal. He's their best run stuffer. If you look at, again, I'm looking just using PFF grades and kind of run stop grades. You already lost Anzalone. So you lost your two guys that really, plug the middle. And that's obviously key against Josh Jacobs and a Green Bay team that runs way more often, I think, than we kind of think about with Jordan Love back there. They've been really run heavy because he's been a little bit inconsistent, kind of boom or bust. But so I think that's going to be impactful. It's interesting. This line's at 3.5. It was 3.5 it closed 3.5 in Green Bay, about 3 weeks ago. But that was also, with Jordan Love kind of hobbling, and it was the bad weather. But it's just kind of interesting that you see the massive adjustment, I think, because of those injuries. So, there clearly is an adjustment here, and it's already kind of reflected in the line. So, I would only look to Green Bay just based on the initial injury data. But, Carlton Davis, I think, is a big one for me because he's by far their best cover corner. So he's the one that I want to see. I mean, if he's out, I think it's a clear Green Bay play. If he's in, then that closes the gap a little bit more, gives him a little bit more of help back there. But, Green Bay can toss, I don't know if Romeo Dobbs is going to play, but, you can go 4 or 5 wide and really spread out a defense that is thin at that position. It's going to really stress them. So especially a defense that refuses to do anything but play man-to-man against those receivers. So I think it'll be a great game, and I definitely can see Green Bay, pulling it out.
Fun Thursday night game. It's always a great way to start your week with some good Thursday football. I have two more we want to get through with them. Monday Night Football. Going to do a little bit of a speed round for these two so we can break down Monday Night Football in more detail, especially considering this game we touched upon already a little bit. But Arizona, Seattle, right now, as I mentioned earlier, the Cardinals laying 2.5 at home, total 44.5. 2 weeks ago in Seattle, this game was essentially a PK. I think Seattle did take some late money, if I'm not mistaken, here to push that game from Arizona -1 to about a PK. But again, if you're considering home field advantage about 2.5 points, which might be a little much, I think this line does make sense. Or maybe I'm wrong, though. So I'll throw to you, Tia, here. Do you think this line makes sense considering what we saw 2 weeks ago and how these last 2 weeks transpired? Or what do you think about this line between these teams?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the ratings have changed that much since a couple of weeks ago, maybe just a tad. So probably makes sense here. I saw some threes last night, so it looks like there's been some buyback. I agree with that. I didn't get to it quick enough, but I would have taken the Seattle if I can got 3, even at like a -120, 115. So at 2.5, probably, I have to think about that. It'd be more of a look more as like a teaser leg with Seattle than anything, but I think the number's kind of dead on right here.
So any thoughts from a ratings perspective if this number is if you expect it to move one way or another, or if it's just wrong compared to your rating system here?
No, I can totally get behind that. I think 2 weeks ago it closed Cardinals -1.5 on the road. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I mean, that game, it was basically a 10-6 game because Seattle had that crazy play on the interception return touchdown. I think the Cardinals looked really, really good against the Vikings. And now you flip home field advantage. So yeah, I can get behind that. I think that number looks solid right now.
Definitely understood. So no, very well said. And obviously, again, such a massive matchup for the NFC West. Arizona certainly needs to pull off this win at home. And if Seattle's able to get it done, then they'll give themselves some cushion in that NFC West that should potentially come down to the wire. But guys, let's get right into Monday Night Football. Of course, we have a massive matchup. Cleveland Browns at Denver. We saw the Browns take a win in a fun snow game last Thursday, and then they get some extra rest to go to the Mile High City, take on the Broncos. Obviously, Denver needs this game more than the Browns need this one for, potential playoff seeding, as the Browns probably would prefer to lose organizationally for a better pick, though. Obviously, as we know, players don't tank. And that stands on FanDuel. Cleveland getting 6.5 points, but heavy juice there, -122. Total of 41.5. TA, it's your Cleveland Browns. We're going to start with you. Talk to me about your thoughts on this Browns matchup.
Yeah, man, I think this is kind of a Judah special. I think you get kind of a wide range of outcomes here, because I think on one end, if the Browns show up like they did against Baltimore and Pittsburgh and winning outright, they could clearly beat Denver and win by margin. Whereas if they play like they did against the Chargers and the Saints, and these are all, by the way, Jameis starts, they can get blown out. So I think there is a wide range. Like I do see scenarios where the Browns win outright or lose by double digits. And so it's a tough game to handicap from that perspective. I think, just on the field, Jameis has played pretty well. This is going to be the toughest defense he has faced so far. I think at left tackle is going to be an issue that they're down to their fourth string, and they were last week as well against Pittsburgh. But that was, they didn't have to deal with Alex Highsmith. He was out. TJ Watt only spends he spends all his time on one side of the field and was at right tackle. So didn't have to worry about it. And it was a lot of snow on the ground. So, it's really hard for pass rushers to get their footing in that situation. So they kind of caught a break there. I'm not going to have that situation this week. You're going to be, in a loud stadium, Monday Night Football, 2 good edge rushers and Nick Bonito and Jonathan Cooper. So I do think they're going to have to, help and chip, because otherwise, if they can't block them, then, they're in trouble. And, Jameis is a guy, obviously, who has a tendency to make the big play or turn the ball over. So that's a big one for me. I just think the other side of the ball, I talked about Bo Nix already, playing better, but he's just caught every break in the book, facing, bad secondaries that were just decimated by cluster injuries, Browns have a much better secondary in that regard. Now, the thing with the Browns is they're top 10 in success rate from a pass defense perspective, and they can, they can make you look bad with Myles Garrett, et cetera, from down to down, but then they'll have a miscommunication issue in the secondary. They have at least one or two of those a game. And that's why they're second from the bottom in terms of explosive pass rate allowed. They also are susceptible, and they were a lot last year to this on the road, to kind of misdirections and screens. They essentially smart offensive coordinators, which obviously I would consider Sean Payton a smart offensive coach, use the Browns' aggression on defense against them. Jim Schwartz's style is to kind of let his guys attack at all stops, but they don't do a good job of kind of recognizing and reacting, so they get burned on screens and misdirection plays and all that. So keep an eye there, because I think that could be a big part of this. So I think Bo Nix could look bad for a couple of plays or even a couple series, and then hit a big play or two, and that's how they'll score. So that's my thinking of how this game will go. I think it'll be relatively competitive. I do think the Browns have a real shot. I think they're definitely live. I don't, it's Bo Nix on, it's not like we're talking about some elite quarterback here. So, I mean, but like I said, he's had a really easy run here. I tweeted about it this morning. Again, it's some of the early season numbers are going to be different. It's totally different for a rookie quarterback versus now. Browns are number one in pressure rate. If you look at the other three teams he's faced that rank top 10 in pressures, those are by far his three worst games from an EPA perspective. I mean, he had didn't he have 2 yards per attempt against the Jets, I believe, early this year. So whenever he's had to face any defense that puts pressure, he's really struggled. So we'll see how much he's adjusted since early in the year. But, it's a fascinating matchup. So I think it's going to be a good game. And, from a prop perspective, I like Jordan Akins as kind of a sleeper with some upside. I think Cedric Tillman's out at receiver. So I think they're going to use a lot more 2 tight end sets. They're going to help, like I said, help Chip on the edge. So he can be, he might be a guy at the goal line who can get you a touchdown or, a couple of receptions. So keep an eye there. And I don't want to step on Judah's toes, but I know we talk a lot about, some inverse correlations at receiver, kind of over yardage and under receptions. That's kind of a fun one because it adds a lot from an odds perspective with SGPs. I ran a quick analysis this morning, just looking how often defenses in the league allow receivers to essentially go over their yardage averages, kind of excluding the games they played against those teams, but then also go under the receptions. And I gave a little bit of variance too, like a 10-degree kind of buffer both ways. And the Browns actually have allowed the most in the NFL 4 times. I'm talking guys like Brian Thomas went 2 for 94. McLaren went 4 for 112. Devonta Smith, 3 for 64. Josh Palmer, 2 for 63 because of that kind of miscommunication in the secondary. So, it's not like Denver has a bunch of burners, but you could find guys like a Marvin Mims or someone like that who could have like an explosive play or two, but only catch 1 or 2 balls if you want some inverse correlation. That's for Jason too, producer Jason over there. That's his favorite thing. So just a couple of looks in this game, not to be too long-winded.
Yeah, and there you see right there, Jason, behind the scenes. We appreciate you showing up what the SGPs could look like. Those correlations, obviously, 2 legs, 12-1. That's where the inverse comes in. But Judah, like TA mentioned, this could be a great game for some inverse or simply just some tail outcomes, considering the wide range of ways he sees this one breaking down. For starters, do you agree? And second of all, let's get to what you're cooking for tonight.
Yeah, I do agree. I think just like Jameis Winston himself is a variant quarterback, I would just push back on the kind of Browns defense generating pressure argument. I think that was a lot more true when Za'Darius Smith was still there. His replacement, Ugbo, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but Okonkwo, I think, is like the worst PFF graded edge rusher. That's a massive delta, especially when you can combine Myles Garrett. Of course, Myles Garrett could blow up any games, but I don't think this is the same defensive unit on the Browns side, and their secondary has been dreadful. Martin Emerson and Greg Newsome have been among the worst cornerbacks in football. They're allowing, I think, like over the last month or so, or 6 weeks, they're dead last in EPA, dead last in explosive play rate. So I don't think this is necessarily the week where Nick slows down. But on the other side, it would not shock me for Winston to keep up. We're going to go a different direction for the SGP. And that is, I kind of love a situation where we get a role change mid-season. The Broncos had been basically rotating a whole bunch of wide receivers behind Cortland Sutton for the first 9 weeks of the season. After they get blown out by the Ravens, the wide receiver rotation changes a bunch, and Devon Vele has really been the wide receiver 2. He's playing on nearly 80% of the snaps, and that's been that way for the last 4 weeks. Naturally, his production has gotten better. And also, when you think about how his samples are priced now, his median is going to look very different from being a part-time player, a guy running 30 to 40% of routes versus the kind of 80 plus he's seen so far. And now he's going up against a defense that is allowing a ton of explosive plays. And Vele has been great. He is way above average. He's kind of in like if we were to plot his play, his separation, and then his play at the catch point and after the catch, he is like firmly in the top right corner. He's just really good. Hasn't seen the field a ton. So we're going to build around Vele and kind of the idea that his alts especially are mispriced. And that's going to be him to have 100 yards. Fanduel offers the kind of 30-yard catch, which I think is probably going to be required for him and Knicks to go over their alts here. We're going to get Knicks 300. Vele anytime touchdown. Got this at 60 to 1 earlier. Really just telling the story of a guy whose role has changed against a defense that has struggled to defend the explosive plays and the pass in general. And 62 to 1 or 61.5, pretty juicy price for the Vele tails.
Vele tails it is. Obviously not a ton of known receivers outside Cortland Sutton on that Denver Broncos team, but Vele's been making a little bit of a name for himself. Connor in the chat called that earlier Vele tails tonight, so shout out to Connor, Judah, great minds, thinking alike. And also I know that T.I., when he was going about Jordan Akins, he mentioned his receiving yard prop, and I know that T.I., he released earlier the prop, and that's gotten like 4 points or 4 yards, I should say there. T.I., so definitely looking like there's a lot of support for that Akins as well to consider. But that's going to wrap it up for us on Forward Progress. We'll be here same time, same place next week on the YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe, share the content with your friends. It's the best way to help us grow. And hit that like button. It really helps the algo, and we really appreciate it. Again, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Tons of content all throughout the week, including live watch-alongs, best bet videos, player prop videos as well. So tons of content to help you guys for the NFL week every single week. We appreciate all you guys. We'll see you guys next time. Best of luck with your bets tonight.